I often find that NGOs that focus on a particular issue have a real clarity about how that issue is affecting that particular group, and that's really useful to draw to the attention of decision makers. But for the overall, particularly when different human rights are affected by one measure, one often need to make sure you've looked at every person's human rights that can be affected. So one group might argue for one particular outcome for their human rights, but another group might want the opposite outcome for their human rights, and the best decisions are made when you're only interfering with anybody's human rights to the minimum necessary, but also not unfairly affecting one group as against another. So I think it's important that particular groups are not unfairly affected. Obviously, ideally nobody's human rights are affected at all, but that's often not possible because of the way life is and the way human rights are, because they allow this flexibility is inherent in them.
Thank you, ma'am. Anybody else has any questions? All the participants, you can type your questions in the chat box. Any of you have any questions? No, Prayasi, we cannot hear you. Can you please type it in the chat box?
Yeah, sure. Just am I audible now? Because I guess typing will take a little more time.
Yes, Prayasi.
Than just asking. Actually, am I audible now?
Yeah, you're audible.
I can hear you. Yeah, ma'am, my question is, if we see in the most of the third world countries, it is one of the major problem that we are facing these days is the repression of the woman
human rights. Like they are being deprived of their human rights even in the normal days. And when we come to this COVID-19 situation where these lockdowns and all is going on, so would you please enlighten us with the suggestions, or maybe what we as a part of this human rights agencies or the NGOs can do to protect those women who are being let's say tortured or physically been assaulted, or any kind of such human rights deprivation has been going on due to this lockdown, have reached more of a level because of the fact that they are being in a house. Let's say in most of the third world countries, our basic problem was like the women of the house is not that educated or are being enlightened with their human rights and what their rights content as a human being in them, and most of this seem that they are not that even educated that they could earn their livelihood, and as a result of which they are under the domination of household men who are being physically or be sexually been assaulted in several times. And due to this lockdown, many reports have seen that these third world countries, this torture effect has increased much of its nature, like due to this lockdown where all are in the same house, which had been not that much of a point when it was a normal day. So would you please highlight that what should we do as a member of these agencies who are protecting the human rights to save these women from this kind of tortures and all?
Oh gosh, well I don't know if I've got all the answers to that question, but I think I'm really glad you raised domestic violence actually, because you're absolutely right, that's been a massive issue and one I didn't include when I listed the many human rights issues, but it definitely wasn't any exhaustive list. Also here, domestic violence has been a very significant issue during coronavirus, I think partly because everybody was at home, and so you can't even escape your abusers because you're all at home. And it's a really, it is, as you say, a very significant issue, and as you also said, education is a key part to dealing with any problem. One of the challenges, as you say, with domestic violence is that it's the relationship with societal values and economic issues as well. You know, what is accepted by society? What does society provide for people who maybe want to escape and want to avoid abuse? What measures are in place? And that's, some of that is societal change that needs to take place about acceptability and about victims' rights. And these things don't happen overnight. It takes education campaigns, and I think coming back to one of the earlier questions about hearing from victims, the more that people hear from victims and realise they're not alone and where they can go for help, the more that society then realises it's a problem, talks about it, and change can be made, because it's often change on a cultural and societal level as much as in an individual case. So there's the slower change as well as what to do in an individual case. I mean, in an individual case, it's very difficult, because it obviously needs to be for a person to decide for themselves what to do with their lives, that they need to have options, and as you say, real world options, which if they are economically dependent upon someone else, they may feel they have no other options. And I guess in some places there are refuges, places for people to go. There's a question as to how much people feel that that's a valid option for them, and that measures are put in place for that to be something that they feel enabled to do and to go to. So I've not really given you a very clear answer, because I think it's a really difficult problem, and a long-term, one that needs both practical short-term solutions for people who are in a situation of crisis and need to get out to save themselves, but it also needs longer-term work through education projects, through projects for society to change its views and to be a more supportive society that realises these are problems that society doesn't want as part of it anymore, and that people should be enabled to take action.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am, for such an answer.
Anybody else has any other questions?
Anybody else has any other questions?
Any other participant?
Any other participant?
Excuse me, I have typed a question in the chat box.
Right, Jasmine, I'll just read it out.
Right, Jasmine, I'll just read it out.
Help me to back. Is it back?
I'm not sure I can read the chats for a minute. I'm just checking.
Right.
Right.
Oh, I can. Sorry, I can. This is yes. This is International Human Rights Law guarantees everyone the right to the highest attainable standard of health, and obligates governments to take steps to prevent threats to public health and to provide medical care to those who need it. Particularly in the case of pandemic, while in India, in instances where some patients have been preferred over others. How does the UK law and government deal with this situation? Well, I think this is rather specific to how each country's healthcare system works. So in the UK we have something called the National Health Service, which was established, I think, in 1948, when after the Second World War there was a lot of concern about welfare, and measures were brought in relation to welfare, including this National Health Service. And what it means is that for anyone in the UK, whether you're visiting or not, you have access. Whether you're visiting or whether you live here, you have automatic access to the NHS for healthcare, and that's done, and that's done based on need. And so there was, at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of discussion about how prioritisation might work. For example, if there are not enough beds and you have someone who maybe has 1 month to live, should they get a bed, or should it be maybe a young child who has their whole life to live? And these are difficult decisions that need to be made, but they're made according to criteria that are fixed by the National Health Service trusts, and they are generally quite robustly tested, these criteria, so that they do not discriminate. And one of the big debates that took place last summer in the UK was whether there was discrimination based on age and based on disability. So there were concerns that people who were perhaps severely disabled and people who were very old would be treated as if their lives were not as valuable as people who were younger and physically fitter. And that was a significant concern and quite a debate. I think where we got to was that normally wouldn't be a factor, and that the only time that things like that would be borne in mind was, for example, if someone had said basically that they knew that they were very old and they didn't have long to live, and they had taken the decision that they didn't want to be resuscitated because they were reaching the end of their life, and that they knew that they didn't have very long, so it was more like spacing out gently, effectively. But there are special procedures for how those discussions happen with someone when they're reaching the end of their life and they do not want life support anymore. So there were some heightened discussions about that. So I'm just going to go back to the question. Am I still with you?
Yeah, ma'am.
Yeah, ma'am.
Oh, I'm sorry, I managed to click out to Zoom. I'm sorry about that. So in terms of some patients being preferred over others, we don't tend to have a system where the preference is that there can be a preference based on clinical need, which means how much one person needs medicine over another. So, for example, during the pandemic, a lot of people did not have medical appointments for minor things. You know, if you hurt your ankle, the doctors would say, look, just put some ice on it, do it at home. If you were feeling unwell, often you'd say, well, you'll have an appointment in 4 months' time because you're not dying, you know?
Yeah.
So there were those prioritization decisions being made, but they were based on clinical need, and the way that clinical need was assessed was really carefully looked at from an equality and human rights perspective, with some real sensitive issues about discrimination based on age and based on disability, and making sure that people didn't feel that because of disability or because of their age that they were being written off as worthless because obviously everyone was illness relevant. So that was a particular discussion that we had over here. I appreciate though that because our system is a national health service where you don't pay, but we pay through taxes, but everybody pays for everybody, no one pays when they get healthcare. So it's a slightly different system than for other countries where maybe healthcare is paid for directly, however I think there could be issues about who gets treated. I've got another question about shortage of vaccine. Oh, it's horrible, isn't it? There are so many big issues with healthcare and human rights. I think one of the issues coming out of coronavirus pandemic will be that the health sector has probably had more of a human rights focus than it's ever had before, and maybe some of these things will be thought through a lot more carefully. The difficulty with medical supplies and including vaccinations is that it's a mixture of contract law, intellectual property law, all of those business interests, and then on one side, and then on the other side you've got people suffering and a need to eliminate diseases, and it's an odd mix as to how it works. The right to healthcare and the right to life clearly mean that they're present in vaccine debates. I think if vaccines were being held up or held back, or there were unfair terms, then definitely these issues would be brought to the fore. In terms of, and there are real issues about how vaccines are being split up as well and distributed within each country as well as between the countries. I'm afraid I don't know how other countries have done it. In the UK, we've done it in reverse age order, vulnerability really. So people who are most vulnerable, which tended to be older people, got it first.
Right.
And it's been working through to at the younger people. I shouldn't say it's not only older people got it first, it's also people who are clinically vulnerable. But again, in the UK, I know a lot of people have been vaccinated, and that's not the case for other countries so much. Not every country anyway, so it's there's a lot of unfairness internationally, I think, as well as within countries. Other countries I've got a lot of friends who live internationally, and I know it's really different. Many countries, it seems to be whoever pays for it gets it, which is again a very different system, a very different approach, and I suppose it's one where you don't have such a welfare state as in the country I happen to live in, where it's, everyone gets it depending on need again, but that is how I think it's a tricky one, so I'll just hand it back to the chat. The next question.
This is the last question we're taking now. It's regarding
This is the last question we're
international
taking now.
students
It's regarding
who come to
the
UK to study
international
and want to go
students
back to their country.
come to
Are
UK
you
to
sure
study and want to go back to
whether
their
the
country.
UK government
Ayushi wants to know
provided them
whether the
particular
UK
aid?
government provided them any particular aid.
I don't know if people did get aid for going back home, because normally if you finish your studies, you pay to go back home yourself. I think the challenge was for people who couldn't go home because of international travel and needed to stay. I'm not aware of any particular aid for students that needed to go back home beyond, because I think that people would normally have had to pay to go home anyway at the end of their studies. I think there have been a lot of issues affecting students, mainly that students often live in very small accommodation that's not designed to be sat in for 24 hours a day. It's different if people are living at home with their families in bigger houses, but often student accommodation is very small. It can be just 8 meters squared or something, 9 meters squared, which is that's not nice living conditions. So I think students have had particular issues with the right to education, and the way that they live is not at all appropriate for being locked down and not allowed out. So they have particular challenges. In terms of international students returning home, I'm afraid I haven't focused on that, and I'm not aware of that being an issue beyond the usual issues at the moment about people not being able to travel, finding they're separated from their families, or indeed are not allowed back in their country of origin, which is sometimes the case, or have long quarantines, which can be sometimes very expensive.
Right.
But sorry, I don't know, I'm not aware of anything actually for that.
Thank you for all the information provided, ma'am. And we've covered
most of the questions.
Yes, well, thank you very much for having me. It's been really lovely to speak to you. I'm sorry I didn't know the answer to all the questions. One of the joys of human rights is that there's never the answer to all the questions, just more things to learn.
Right, ma'am. We're really honored to have you. Thank you for answering most of our questions. And I think it was a lovely and insightful session. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was really.
Ma'am, do you have any concluding remarks?
Do you want to say something?
I've been honoured to speak with you today, and it's been really interesting to hear the shared challenges really that we're facing, and how I guess it really strikes me that the issues are very, very much the same, just often viewed from a slightly different angle, slightly different. The issues are the same, just the way they materialise can be different. that's been really, really interesting. It's just been an honour to speak with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank
We'll end
you.
this session here.
We'll end this session here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.